to using native. Welcome to using native plants in on Long Island in your gardening, and I'm really excited that we can do this. Anthony, I don't know if you knew this, but 10 years ago, after Superstorm Sandy, one of the things that we did at Christ Church is we had a half-day workshop that was caring for your landscapes after Sandy. And one of the things that this was done by someone from Cornell Cooperative Extension, and one of the things that she talked about was using, she talked about native plants, and she talked about how, how what we all have planted with, so much of it came to grief after Sandy, and that sometimes that the native plants would have done us better. And so I'm kind of excited about this because I feel like this is carrying on that that legacy that we started. And so I'm looking forward to your presentation, and you're having native plants available for us. And I want to welcome all of you to being with us tonight. And now I'm going to turn it over to, oh, I didn't tell you who I am. I'm Mother Claire Neesmith. I'm the rector of Christ Church, Babylon. And so now I'm turning it over to Diane Gaden, who is our senior warden. She is the coordinator of our community meal ministry, Nourish Babylon. And she is she works a lot with native plants in her garden and has learned a lot and wants to share it. So, Diane.
Okay. Yeah, about 3 years ago, I was talking to a master gardener, and she was telling me about, teaching me a lot about gardening with native plants. And then she spoke about Anthony and his, one of his services was coming up, giving consultations for property. So I hired him to come to my property and kind of give me a roadmap for how to convert my property to native plantings. And if you know me at all, I'm sure you've heard me speak about that process and about his knowledge. And so tonight I'm happy to share him and all his wisdom with you. So Anthony Marinello is a certified landscape and nursery professional through the state of New York and owner of Drop Seed Native Landscapes, a retail native plant nursery located in Nassau County, specializing in ecotypic, hard to find, and edible native plants. Anthony also has a position on the executive board of directors with the Long Island Native Plant Initiative as secretary. And with a passion for native conservation, he has spent the last decade working with native plants and had made it his mission to educate the residents of Long Island on the benefits and virtues of native plants. He has also created and currently administers the Long Island Native Plant Gardening Group on Facebook, a community of over 11,000 members, and continues to spearhead the native plant movement on Long Island, being featured in Newsday as well as the Long Island Herald, while working in partnership with various local environmental nonprofits such as Rewild Long Island and the Suffolk County Alliance for Pollinators. Take it away, Anthony.
Great. Thank you, Mother Claire and Diane. I'm just going to share my screen. We are being recorded. If you guys have any questions, feel free to hold them until the end. We'll have a short Q&A when I finish up with the presentation. I'm going to just ask everybody if you can mute your computers or phones, whichever you're on, and I'll get started. Okay, so thank you again for joining. Tonight we'll be speaking about the beneficial impacts of gardening with native plants. You might be wondering, why should you garden with native plants? What makes native plants so important? And to understand what makes them so important, you need to understand the issues that we are facing today. So we have a mixture of overdevelopment, invasive species, climate change, and pollution. And all of these are compounding and they are causing issues all across the planet. They are known altogether as the Anthropocene, the age of man, the sixth mass extinction, or the insect apocalypse. That is a mouthful. So all that is coming together and pretty much just causing devastation all across the planet. We have plenty of pollution, habitat loss is at an all-time high. Much of the natural areas have been developed, and satellite imagery is only showing about 20 to 40% left of Earth's surface is still in relatively good condition. Luckily, the Earth can heal and we are its curators. And so the actions we carry out on our own properties and in our community centers can have far-reaching consequences and far-reaching benefits. So along with the habitat loss, we have the maintenance issue is a great problem as well. So lawns are a big problem. We are on Long Island. That is the home of the lawn. That is the originating point of the lawn, and at least in America. It's an outdated landscape aesthetic. It was used to be you would grow your lawn and it was, you know, you would have a flock of sheep maybe, and it was a way for the aristocrats to show that I have excess money, I can waste land that could be, you know, farmed on just aesthetics of just a nice green turf. Nowadays, most people have lawns, they don't use them for anything. We could be growing food, we could be growing native plants. Instead, we have turned them into a toxic wasteland where every week a mow and blow landscaper comes, you know, maybe every 2 weeks someone comes and sprays or applies pesticides, and then also the fertilizers, which are also petroleum derived, cause more pollution and are also toxic to many forms of life as well. Native plants, of course, can be the solution. So wherever you go on the planet, native plants are the foundation of their food web. So whether you're in North America, South America, Europe, or Asia, whatever plants are native to that area are the foundations of their respective food webs. A native plant is a plant that existed, at least in North America, a native plant is a plant that existed on the continent before Europeans made their way here. So generally, Columbus discovering the Caribbean, not America, would be the date that we use for saying if a plant was native or if it's been introduced. So anything after that point, the plant has been introduced. Anything before that point, the plant is considered native. So when I say the foundation of the food web, that is because the insects are specific to their respective host plants. Without their host plants, the insects have nothing to feed on. And that is catastrophic for the food chain because larger life forms such as songbirds are not able to find food for themselves because there are no insects for them to eat. Their chicks starve in their nest. And of course that, you know, anything that eats a songbird, any higher up life form also then has trouble finding food. So native plants, Mother Claire did speak a little earlier about how there was a previous meeting at the church after Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, and how if they had had more native plants, maybe all of us had more native plants before Superstorm Sandy, that they would have been more resilient and we would have had more resilient plantings. The island would have been more resilient itself to the superstorm, and that the landscapes would have rebounded a lot quicker if more of our plants were in fact native species. So that is great information that was shared with the church. That is 100% correct. And that is because native plants are resilient through evolution, because they have evolved in a location for a set number of years, thousands of years on Long Island, tens of thousands of years on Long Island. They are pest resistant, they're deer resistant, they don't need fertilizers, and they don't need supplemental irrigation. And that is because they've adapted to our climate, our soil. They've adapted to the fact that there are animals eating them. And of course, what we would consider a pest is just another day for them. So here on the right is a photo of a monarch butterfly caterpillar in my garden feeding on some milkweed. You can see how important milkweeds are to monarch caterpillars. I'm sure many of you in the meeting tonight have heard of monarch caterpillars and the plight of monarch caterpillars and butterflies. Last year, they were classified as endangered now. Their numbers continue to plummet, unfortunately. So by planting native plants, and not just their host plants, but also nectaring plants for the adults like asters and goldenrods, we are providing more habitat for this life form here and ensuring that they're able to continue their migration from North America to Central America, the mountains and forests of Mexico. Altogether, all of these characteristics of native plants means that they have a lower long-term maintenance cost compared to a turf lawn. And compared to an ornamental lawn that might need more pesticide applications or irrigation or even fertilization. So for many of you who have front lawns who are paying somebody right now, or even backyards who are paying somebody right now to come weekly and to mow that down and clean that up every week, all of that money, what I like to tell people is figure out how much money you spend a year on that service and say, what if I could even just invest half of that into creating a garden, and then do that this season, do it again the next season, and then before you know it, you won't have any grass left and you won't have to pay anybody to mow and blow anymore, and you'll be saving even more money. You can maybe donate more to the church or do anything with the money. So benefits for people: they provide cleaner air, water, and soil through that absence of chemicals and emissions. They preserve our soil. So when we have a storm system coming, such as a hurricane or like the torrential downpours we've been having more and more frequently lately, they help hold that soil together. They prevent erosion. They prevent the siltation of our streams and waterways. They also decrease the stormwater runoff. So they absorb all that. They help slow the water down, absorb the runoff, absorb the rainwater, filter it through the soil, filter it through the roots, and prevent all the siltation, all the pollution, and all of the nasty stuff from making its way from parking lots, lawns, everywhere else, and into our waterways. This increases and preserves the biodiversity for a healthier, more resilient ecosystem. And of course, native plants are beautiful, so they increase the ornamentation of our homes and communities, and they provide a great learning space for children and adults. They also nurture the human soul. So biophilia is a real thing. People just like being around nature. They like being around the color green. They like being around bees and the flowers and butterflies flying overhead. And of course, it restores and preserves the soundscape. So having those songbirds in maybe a nice little garden sitting area, let's say we'll use the church as an example, having a spot where you can sit down, relax, listen to the wind rustle through the trees, listen to the birds in the trees, listen to the blades of grass slide on each other. All of that is lacking in today's modern world. Even in the suburbs, you get a lot of grass and a lot of nothing that really sways in the wind or makes any noise, so there's a lack of nature. What you usually hear in the suburbs is motors and cars and stereos. I want to backtrack to the stormwater and the preserving of soil. So it was just announced today, or this week at least, that the DEC is actually providing $500 worth of rebates or grants, I should say, for homeowners who are looking to either install rain gardens with native plants or rain barrels or anything like that. So it's a great opportunity for people who are just getting started. If you're on a budget, that the state will actually reimburse you. You have to apply for the grant, and if you are successful in getting the grant, they will reimburse you up to $500, which is a pretty good chunk of change to create a rain garden, plant native plants, and otherwise harvest and conserve rainwater and prevent stormwater runoff. So this is a great table that I like to show people. This is just to show how important our native plants are. So I did mention before how native plants are the foundation of their ecosystem, and that the insects in a respective area require those native plants in order to reproduce, which those insects are then eaten by higher life forms like songbirds. So in our region, the Mid-Atlantic Northeast region, oaks, cherries, and plums, along with willows, host the most amount of caterpillar species. So caterpillars are used because they are the most targeted type of food source for songbirds. They are fatty, they're high in protein, they have the proper nutrient profile to quickly raise chicks from hatchlings to fledglings. And in areas where there are no native plants or a lacking of native plants, there have been studies that show that songbirds actually struggle to raise their chicks successfully. Many times their chicks will starve, or they won't be able to raise the full clutch to maturity. This table is courtesy of Professor Doug Tallamy. He has written some fantastic books on the subject. He's actually an entomologist and not a botanist, but he studies the relationship between our native trees, the insects, and specifically the birds that then feed on these insects. So the study I just mentioned was actually one of his studies that showed in a suburban area, I think it was in Pennsylvania, in a suburban area where there is a lack of native trees, these songbirds do actually struggle to survive. And in yards with native trees, especially oaks, cherries, or willows, these species of songbirds thrive. So this photo here is actually a serviceberry, which I did circle on the chart as well. It doesn't come in quite as high as 519 like an oak, but it's a highly ornamental species. So I just like to show it to people just so you can get an idea of just how beautiful our native plant species can be. And you may have possibly even seen something like this recently in the past couple of weeks, because they have been blooming and they are blooming right now. And I'm always surprised actually that there are plenty of native plants planted in typical formal landscapes that you wouldn't know what they were unless you happen to know you were familiar with native plants. Serviceberry is one of them. So the town of Hempstead, where I live, actually just planted out past couple of years hundreds of serviceberry trees on the street to replace ailing pear trees. So they're great ornamental trees. They provide early nectar sources for emerging pollinators, and they also provide edible berries for both humans and songbirds and other forms of wildlife around June. So that's another great plant for people to use in a landscape. Songbirds love it, bees love it. You can support your pollinators, and it does host over 100 different species of caterpillars that will then also go on to feed songbirds as well. I just quickly want to look at this chart really quick, because a few different species here. Long Island is the land, what I like to call the land of oak and pine. So it's not circled here, but pine is on the list on the left side. A little further down, it's midway. They host around 243 different species of caterpillars. So I just wanted to show the diversity of plant species that we have on Long Island, at least in the tree form. We do also have plenty of other species that are important. So these three species, the three genera, I should say, the oaks, the cherries, and the willows, those are actually what are known as keystone species. And that is because they, like a keystone in an archway, without them in the ecosystem collapses. So with these three species being keystone species, they support the most amount of caterpillars to then feed other songbirds and other forms of wildlife. They are the most important species ecologically for you to plant if you have the space and the ability to do so. There are some herbaceous keystone species as well. So sunflowers or asters, mostly members of the aster family. So sunflowers are members of the aster family. Sunflowers are very important as well. And then the other one would be goldenrods, which are also extremely important. I mentioned goldenrods earlier for monarch butterflies as a nectar source for migrating adults, but they're also very important as an insect host as well. They do host a few couple hundred different species of caterpillars along with the sunflowers. So if you are looking for the most ecologically important plants to plant for the most ecological punch, those would be the species to consider. So if you were creating a native plant garden, you will be supplying wildlife with food, shelter, places to raise young, and of course, refuge from pesticides, noise and air pollution, because you won't be maintaining this with leaf blowers or mowers anymore, and light pollution. Ideally, you would prevent or limit artificial nightlight, exterior nightlight. Use an orange or amber wavelength bulb. or put it on a sensor, a motion sensor. A lot of these caterpillars, like this photo here, is a gray catbird in the maritime forest of Brooklyn, actually. And this photo was captured by my friend Carl. It's a beautiful migratory gray catbird here hunting a caterpillar. So again, this is in a black cherry tree. So this is number 2 on the keystone species list of the most productive. It's number 2. And the reason you want to avoid light pollution is because many of these caterpillars are not turning into butterflies. Many of these caterpillars are actually turning into moths. So there are probably more moths feeding on the trees than butterfly species. And moths are exceptionally fatty, and moths are mostly nocturnal. So what happens is if we are illuminating our gardens and illuminating our properties excessively or incorrectly, what happens is you're kind of negating the benefits that you're producing with the native plants. So always limit lighting around native plants, put them on the sensor, or get yourself some wildlife friendly lighting. There are certified wildlife friendly fixtures as well as bulbs on the market. So this is a great example of just what forms of wildlife you might support by using native plants. And that's because a lot of times people have a certain angle or a certain theme that they're going for when they first get started with their native plant journey, as I call it. So a lot of times people will be interested in saving the pollinators or saving the butterflies, or maybe they want to make a songbird garden, or maybe you're a little more interesting, like myself or Diane, where you're doing some permaculture gardens or forest gardening. So what happens when you focus on one of those is, let's say you're planting a pollinator garden. So you're, especially looking to support maybe the specialist pollinators. So like the bumblebees, the carpenter bees, the orchard bees. So you're planting out a diverse array of native plant species in order to support those pollinators through each of the seasons. What ends up happening is, because you're using those native flowering species, you end up also creating a butterfly garden. So even though you're only focusing on the pollinators, you do end up supporting the butterflies because they'll be hosting on those plants. In the same way, you will be supporting the songbirds because the songbirds will come in, eat some of those butterfly caterpillars, but also feed on the seeds that were produced after the pollinators fed on the flowers, or the berries that were produced after the pollinators fed on the flowers. So it's a whole, everything is connected. It's a whole little microcosm in your own little garden there. And no matter which one you happen to be focusing on to get started, whatever your inspiration was, it's usually a snowball effect where once you start seeing how much diversity starts to show itself in your garden and becomes observable, that you really do start supporting a whole host of different species. So you'll end up with things like box turtles, bats, rabbits, and of course things like opossums, and if you're lucky, maybe you'll spot a fox, something similar like that. So create a little bit of habitat for one type of wildlife and end up supporting a whole ton of other forms of wildlife as well. So here is, I should update this because she just posted a photo earlier today. This is Angela. She is a customer of mine. Well, this is her house, I should say, in her garden, not her herself. She's a Mineola, and she's been taking advantage of the rebate program through the town of North Hempstead for native plant rain gardens. Again, the theme is preventing stormwater runoff and excess stormwater. So she removed her lawn. I think 2 years in a row, you can get up to $200 or $250 now. And this was just approved again as well in the town of North Hempstead. In order to plant out native plant gardens, reduce your lawn, and absorb some rainwater. So this is just to show the difference between, a lawn that a little spotty, there's definitely fungus in that lawn as well, and then a diverse planting of native plants. The photo she posted about an hour ago actually is really fantastic. So I'll have to update this for the next group that I show this presentation to. But she has plenty of forms of wildlife in her garden. So here are photos from her garden. We have, again, monarch butterflies. So we have on the right, we have both a male and a female monarch butterfly nectaring on Joe Pyeweed. So to the left is another monarch caterpillar feeding on butterfly weed. So butterfly weed is a species of milkweed, and monarch butterflies require species of milkweed only for the caterpillars to eat. So as caterpillars, as larvae, they can only consume foliage and plant material from those specific types of plants, so only the milkweeds. As adults, they can nectar on different kinds of flowers, so they're a lot more adaptable in that regard as adults, where they can feed on asters, they can feed on Joe Pye weeds, they can feed on goldenrods. They'll even probably feed on some non-native things that are in flower as well at the time. But it's very important to not only provide these migratory insects with their host species that you see here, the milkweeds, but also the nectaring species for the adults, like the Joe Pye weeds, like the goldenrods, and like the asters. You may notice also that a lot of our native plants are not named very nicely. So butterfly weed, milkweed, Joe Pye weed. The weed in the name gives these plants a negative connotation, but that is really only because these plants were named by white European settlers, and they were naming the plants that were popping up in their agricultural fields. So to a farmer, it's a weed. So that's why most of these plants are named with that word attached to them, unfortunately. So there's a little bit of a hill to overcome with that, just because it's hard to sell someone a plant when it has weed in the name, but their virtues cannot be understated with how important they are to the local ecology, both on a local as well as a grand scale, a regional scale. So here are some more photos from her garden. So these are two more butterfly species. So on the left, you have spice bush swallowtail, which only host on spice bushes, as well as tulip trees. So Angela has a couple spice bushes in her yard, and I was very surprised that within only a couple of years, she was able to attract spice bush swallowtail butterflies. So these caterpillars are really awesome. They mimic snakes. So they're little tiny caterpillars, but they have these giant false eyes. So that way, if something comes to bother them, they prop their head up and they shake back and forth, and they actually try to intimidate the bird that is trying to eat them into thinking, no, I'm a snake. I'm not I'm not an insect. You can't eat me. I might bite you. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's just a great adaptation to avoid being eaten by a small little invertebrate. On the right here is a male and again a female black swallowtail. So these two adults, these are male and female, again, they are on their host plant. So it's very likely that after these two insects fed on these flowers, that they then reproduced. And what's really amazing about this photo is that it shows how just in Angela's garden alone, this species at least can actually persist and reproduce and survive without ever having to leave her property. She has all the habitat this species needs for an entire life cycle, from the hatching out of the egg to pupating and turning into an adult, feeding on the flowers of the various different types of native flowering perennials that she's purposely included in her property, and then laying eggs again and starting the cycle over. So just her property is providing year-round habitat for this single species, as well as probably the spice bush swallowtail as well. And they never have to leave. They can just keep reproducing and provide the neighborhood who isn't doing this right now with that overflow of benefiting of, the kids get to see these butterflies still because one person on the block happens to be providing habitat for them. They haven't gone locally extinct in her neighborhood because she happens to be providing habitat for them. So it's just a great example of the diversity that just one person has in their garden. So if you're thinking about getting started, it really helps to know your ecoregion, where you are. So on Long Island, we have a few different ecoregions. Most of us are on the South Shore, I think, in this meeting today. Long Island is really all you have to know in terms of ecoregion. You want to generally use plants that are native to within 250 miles of your home. So stick to plants in the Northeast region, stick to plants, northern mid-Atlantic species. You can research your plants with these great resources here. So the New York Natural History Program guides are great options, especially if you want to mimic a plant community on your property. The New York Plant Atlas or Flora Atlas is another awesome database. You can actually search by county and put in what's native, what's not native, what's been introduced, and that you can actually use by county. And that's another great resource. I probably use that every single day. And then wildflower.org is a third option for you. That's again a national database, but it's a great database. And again, it's just a great way to familiarize with the plants, learn the plants' names. It's very important for you to learn the botanical names of plants you might be interested in at least purchasing, just because if you know the botanical name of the plant, then you know that that plant is native to wherever it may be. So plenty of times you may go to shop for a plant, or you may be speaking to a plant about a plant to somebody. And let's say black-eyed Susan. There's 3 or 4 different species of plants known as black-eyed Susan. One of them is native to Africa. So it really helps to know that you're speaking about the same plant, you're purchasing the right plant. So it really helps to know the botanical name. The botanical name is going to consist of both a genus and a species. So Opuntia humifusa would be our prickly pear cactus, our native cactus to Long Island. Many people are surprised to learn that we have a native cactus to Long Island. And I have to update this photo as well, because those in the know have yet to call me out on it. But the photo here is actually not our eastern prickly pear cactus. This is a prickly pear cactus. This is our second prickly pear cactus that's native to New York State. So this one will be found along the Hudson River more so than Long Island. And I know that because it has the pink centers. So Opuntia humifusa, eastern prickly pear cactus, does not have pink centered flowers. Opuntia cespitosa has pink centered flowers, and that is found on the mainland, not on Long Island. So again, that's why it helps to know your botanical names, because then you know that if you go to the store and it's mislabeled, you know better. But like I said, if you know your botanical names, you can shop anywhere. You can be sure that you're purchasing the right plant, you're planting the right plant, and then you also can be sure that you research the proper plant, and that you're not going to be planting something that's going to overtake your garden, whether it aggressively fills in, whether it aggressively self-sows and self-seeds, anything like that. You want to avoid, I like to set people up for success. So I always tell people to plan, and research, rather than, get ahead of yourself and start planting things. And then in a year, you're like, what did I do? I planted common milkweed and half my yard is now common milkweed. So learn from other people's mistakes, take the time, plan everything out properly when you're getting started with native plants. The right plant for the right place is the slogan, is the phrase to remember. You don't want to be making mistakes and planting oak trees on top of your sewer lines, for example. So it always helps to research your plants. So, as mentioned earlier, I am the secretary for the Long Island Native Plant Initiative. What we do is we go around and we do our best to preserve the native plant, pretty much gene pool of Long Island. So when we're doing a restoration job, or sometime in the future, like me, I sell plants for a living. So when you have plants on a shelf for resale, or if you're doing an installation job, or even the grower themselves, our goal at LINPI is to collect seeds from the wild on Long Island, to save those seeds in a seed bank for long-term storage, but also to reproduce those seeds, grow them out, and then eventually allow those seeds to be a source for propagation purposes on Long Island with our local growers. So when I buy plants from local growers, sometimes they're ecotype, sometimes they're not. Ecotype simply means the genetics to a certain area. So Long Island genetic provenance. So that's important because, as we said earlier, plants are adapted to different regions. So you want to use native plants to our region. You don't want to use native plants from the West or the Midwest or down South. Some of our plants are native all across the continent. So butterfly weed, for example, you can have butterfly weed in New York, you can have butterfly weed in California, you can have butterfly weed in the Midwest. So it helps to use plants that are genetically provenant to our region. That's how you know that they'll be the most adapted and nothing can really be thrown at them. They will survive. They'll be more resilient that way. So that's what we do at Limpy. We do our best to preserve these genetics for future generations with the goal of allowing our local growers and wholesale nurseries and wholesale growers and farmers to use those seeds to grow out genetically provenant plants to Long Island. So these perennials here are just to give you a quick display of the different colors and different aesthetics that you might find in our native plants. So the orange here you see is butterfly weed. The pink right next to it to the right is swamp milkweed. We have Maryland golden aster, frost aster, one of our goldenrod species. The bottom row is actually our rose swamp mallow, which is our native Long Island hibiscus. So besides having a native cactus, we also have a native hibiscus on Long Island. It is a member, it prefers, what I'm trying to say is it prefers coastal and swampy areas. So it's a coastal species. It can handle some brackish water, and it also prefers freshwater streams, creeks, and lakes as well. Our native iris, we have 3 different species of native iris on Long Island. One of them is actually endangered. And then blue vervain, flat-topped goldenrod, and I'm drawing a blank here. I'm thinking of the botanical name and not the common name. We'll skip it for now. I don't know why I'm having trouble with that last plant. But here again, so some more diversity and some more beautiful colors here. So I mentioned that cactus before and how our native Long Island cactus does not have pink center. So in the center here, you can see the bright yellow flowers of the actual Long Island native cactus here. But again, we have some nice, beautiful Maryland golden asters, some goldenrod, our native indigo here. I don't know. Can you guys see my remote, my mouse cursor that I roll over?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just to show you some diversity and the colors that you see here. Yarrow here. This is bush clover, one of our bush clovers, nitrogen fixer. It'll fertilize your garden for you. One of our asters, butterfly weed again. One of our asters, probably smooth blue aster, and this is one of our beneficial wasp here. So this is probably a potter wasp or some sort of parasitic wasp. Just great diversity, great color, and just all around very high ornamentation throughout the season. Grasses are also another great aspect to a native plant garden. They add a lot of texture and movement. A lot of them also host insects. So switchgrass hosts skipper butterflies. So those are those little butterflies that like to fly around your garden in groups of 3s and 5s all the time, all through the late summer. And then, of course, songbirds eat the seeds through the winter and build nests with the blades the next following spring. So the other great benefit of native grasses is they are exceptionally drought tolerant and they are deer resistant. So if anyone in the presentation tonight has a problem with deer or even rabbits, grasses are the way to go. Go grass heavy in your gardens, create a prairie. The South Shore, especially where we are, would have been maritime grasslands. So go grass heavy. You know, we have a great diversity of grasses. Here's Indian grass. I'm sorry, this is actually big blue stem. This is Indian grass. This is little blue stem, purple love grass. I believe this is Indian grass again. Just all around great colors, great textures. Purple love grass right here makes a spectacular lawn substitute. You can mow it, you can walk on it, you can play games on it. The kids can roll around. You wouldn't even know it's not a lawn. It'll almost look like a crabgrass lawn, but it'll have the added benefit of not needing any type of inputs on your part. No fertilizer, no irrigation, and mowing only a couple times a year versus every week. So the other reason grasses are important, and a lot of our perennials do this as well, is stem nesting bees. So stem nesting bees are very tiny. They're stingless, like most of our bees. only your European honeybees have that hive mentality where they'll sting you for getting too close. Everyone else, they nest in colonies, but they don't have that hive mentality of let's protect the queen, I gotta sting you. Instead, they either nest underground, which is another reason why we don't want to use pesticides, or they nest in the plants themselves. So they don't use grasses to feed on pollen and nectar, but they will use grasses to nest in. So these tiny little bees are smaller than your pinky nail, will burrow into these hollow stems, lay their egg, seal it with wax, lay another egg, and continue to do that until the stem is filled up. Those eggs then remain in those stalks for a full 365 days. So this needs to stand in the garden. So that's why we don't do cleanups in native plant gardens like you would in traditional or conventional landscaping. You do a cutback, you don't cut it all back, but you don't remove all of that plant material because it continues to provide habitat and continues to provide resources for all sorts of wildlife. So it's very important to leave what you can standing to create that habitat all throughout the year. With that, we come to the end of my presentation. Maintenance is a completely different topic, which I would love to present if you'd have me back to do that. I do want to announce we are having a church benefit plant sale to support Christ Episcopal Church in Babylon. So next Friday and Saturday, just in time for Mother's Day. Friday, May 12th, we'll be there from 12 to 6, and Saturday, May 13th, we will be there from 10 to 3. Like I said, a portion of every purchase will go to supporting the church. Please let your friends know, let anybody know. And at this point, if you'd like to ask any questions, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll take your questions. I think I stopped sharing my screen. You can all tell me if you can see me. All right. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free. You can unmute yourself and feel free to ask.
Thank you. This was a lot of information. How is the best way to start?
So the best way to start is if you guys, so if you're on Facebook, we mentioned earlier too, join my Facebook group, the Long Island Native Plant Gardening Group. So the Long Island Native Plant Gardening Group, I did post it in the chat as well for you. It's a great group. We're over 11,000 strong. I think we're like at 11.3 or 11.4 thousand at this point. It's a great just community to get started with. Otherwise, if you're not on Facebook, let me get the book for you. So Doug Tallamy wrote a couple books. He continues to write books as well. So Bringing Nature Home is a great book to get started, just to really get the whole concepts down of what we're dealing with. And Nature's Best Hope is another great one as well. Let's see. There you go. Nature's Best Hope, both by Doug Tallamy. These books will really get you to understand just how pressing the matter is and the issue is of what we've done with the continent and how by creating residential neighborhoods, we've displaced entire ecosystems, but we don't have to, knock down houses. All we have to do is change the plants that we have in our gardens. And it's very simple. You can have a formal garden if you want. You could have a more naturalistic garden like the one behind me here. It's up to you. But those two books are great to get started with. Of course, if you need additional help, you can call me as Diane did. We do provide consultation services. I can come down to your home. I could tell you exactly what to be planting so that you don't have to guess. And also come down to the plant sale on Friday or Saturday. I can help you. You tell me or my assistant your conditions of what you're growing or where you're going to grow. And I can tell you exactly what plants to take home that day and to get started with. So those are the few options I would say to get started, to plant that seed and to start your journey with native plants.
Thank you.
Of course.
I have a question.
Sure, Patty.
Hi, I've got two questions actually.
Okay.
One is, you talk about butterfly weed. Is that the same thing as our butterfly bushes?
No. So butterfly bush is actually an invasive species, and it's actually from Africa. So that's the other reason why you really do want to learn your botanical names, because a lot of these common names are just marketing gimmicks. And so you're going to see a lot of butterfly activity on a butterfly bush. So you're going to think you're doing something for them by doing that. But a butterfly bush in North America does not produce a single butterfly. It actually, there have actually also been studies that shows that the nectar that it produces is subpar and not of quality that a native shrub that's blooming at the same time of year would provide. So what we recommend you replace it with would be something like a summer sweet. So Clethra alnifolia, I'll type that in the chat for you. That's another fall blooming, late summer, or actually full summer. So that'll bloom all through the summer into early fall. And it gives you white trumpet flowers. There's pink cultivars as well if you prefer pink. Very fragrant flower. That's why it's called summer sweet. And it's very attractive to hummingbirds and butterflies. And
Great.
that will produce more butterflies and will feed the natives that are already in your garden. And then what I recommend is, of course, to dispose of those butterfly bushes, because what happens is a lot of times people will say when they're just learning about it, it's not invasive in my garden. An invasive species doesn't necessarily invade an individual person's garden. What happens is, especially with butterfly bushes, their wind disperses the seeds. So they go to seed, the wind takes it away, and late fall is usually when you start seeing butterfly weed seedlings pop up in gardens and parks. It's a fall germinating plant. So we do recommend to dig those up and dispose of them. Don't give them away, and replace it with a native alternative that would do better and still provide you the ornamentation you're looking for.
Great, thank you.
course.
My other question is, when you had that list and I saw pine was up near the top, and I live on the eastern end of Long Island, and we've had
Okay.
such a terrible time with I guess it's the southern pine beetle has
Yeah, the
killed so
southern
many
pine
pine
beetle.
trees. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the southern pine beetle, it's as the climate has warmed, and also as we move things around, because of course humans played their part in it as well. The southern pine beetle has come up and negatively affected our pine stands on Long Island. There is probably much more things at play here, such as the lack of fire in our ecosystem. Same with ticks. Like in places where there's wildfires, there's less ticks, and of course less tick diseases. We don't allow wildfires anymore, but I have seen a ton of pitch pines brown out because of the pine beetles out east, especially. What's interesting is pitch pines and pine beetles exist down south together. The pine beetles don't exist this far north naturally. I think what we're seeing is just the preliminary effects of two ecosystems kind of converging, and it'll balance out with time, whether it's 50 years or 100 years, whatever it may be, it'll balance out. There's even been some data that says like the adult pine trees, the mature ones, don't fare well, but the young ones are just fine. So go ahead and plant your young pine trees and let them grow, because they'll still be doing much benefit while they're growing. We have right now, our main pine on Long Island would be the pitch pine. We used to have Virginia pine, shortleaf pine, and red pines as well. So maybe try one of those species instead of the pitch pine, since the pitch pines are mostly getting affected right now. Maybe try a red pine or a Virginia pine instead. White pine tends to get much larger, so I wouldn't do the white pine unless you have the room for it. You can also try the white pine if you have the space.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Continuing on the butterfly bush thing, I know we also have had lantana. Is that something that we should now avoid?
Not every non-native species is necessarily an invasive species. So more than likely you can keep that. It's not going to be a problem. There are some species though that just are very aggressive, are very invasive. So the pear trees, for example, Bradford pears or flowering pears. So these trees they're diseased all over the island. They're falling down everywhere. They're highly invasive. So you go into our state parks, you go to our nature preserves, you can see them popping up. I've seen them pop up in in parking lots, in between bricks, in between, on top of buildings. So these are species that we got to look for, and we got to no longer plant. The state does ban invasive species when they become a problem, but by the time they become a problem, they become a problem. So it's too late at that point. So Japanese honeysuckle, which a lot of people, I'm sure you all grew up with the sweet smell of honeysuckle in the garden, and pulling the flowers off and drinking the nectar. I did that myself as a young child. But that's the Japanese honeysuckle. You cannot purchase Japanese honeysuckle anymore. It's prohibited in the state. You wouldn't need to purchase it because more than likely it'll pop up in your garden on its own anyway, because it's so prevalent and the birds spread it around so much. I have never seen our native honeysuckle in the wild. I've only ever seen Japanese honeysuckle in the wild. So that tells you just how displaced our ecosystem is, because you have such a prevalence of the non-native species completely outcompeting the native species in a region. So to answer your question, not everything is bad. You have a few plants that you personally like that don't spread, that aren't going to be taken up by the birds and deposited in their droppings, not going to be blown away. By all means, you can keep it. But it does help to know the botanical names that you're looking for, so you could properly research that information. Quickly, I'll just mention also Montauk daisies are not native to Long Island. They're not native to Montauk. They're native to Japan. So everywhere else, the botanical name mentions Japan twice, Nippon. So let's see if I can remember it from memory. It's Nipponicum nipponcanthemum. So it mentions it twice, Nippon, which is the antique word for Japan. And everywhere else, they call them Nippon daisies. They do not call them Montauk daisies. Only on Long Island and Massachusetts and Connecticut do we call them Montauk daisies. And in North America, only Long Island and a couple counties in Connecticut are they invasive, because that's where we're like the only ones who are planting them, and they become invasive in the few counties in which they're being planted in the tri-state. Anyone else have any questions tonight?
I want to know again, what was that wonderful grass that you said that you could use
Purple love grass. So purple love grass. It has a really great name. Yes. So it has that name because in late summer, it blooms beautiful purple pink flowers and seed heads. It's very ornamental. If you were to just let it grow, it becomes a little bunch grass. But if you were to mow it, it forms almost like a turf. It's very similar to crabgrass. It's related to crabgrass. And I've seen it in sports fields, side of the parkway, Sunrise Highway. So if you ever drive down Sunrise Highway in late summer, early fall, and you see just the pink clouds everywhere, that's purple lovegrass. So you've probably seen it before, just didn't know the name, and you didn't know that you could purchase it for home use and grow it yourself. My meadow in front of my house is a mix of purple lovegrass and some sedges, which are grass-like, and they can form a turf with time. I'm working on that to make it a little more meadow-like and less spotty here and there. All right.
This has
Well,
been really interesting.
Yes,
Thank you,
thank you. This was
thank you.
really a lot of information all at once.
yes, I
Right.
try to narrow it down just for the introduction, but of course, there's always too much to discuss. Last week, I actually spoke for almost a full 2 hours at the Cornell Spring Gardening School for Suffolk County. They gave me a double period, and I was supposed to only speak for the hour, and it went for 2 hours. And they were like, if you can manage, do it. I could manage. There's plenty to speak about, so I just kept talking. But if no one has any other questions tonight, I think it's a great time. We can sign off. Please come visit us at the benefit plant sale next Friday and Saturday. I know Diane, and I'm sure Mother Claire will share the information again, but it is also posted on Facebook. It's posted on my Facebook, but I'm sure it will be shared either in person or through your own email chains as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Anthony.
Of course, thank you.
This has been really enlightening, and I'm thinking that at the rectory we need a meadow.
Yes. So actually, what you can do is really quick. The last thing I'll say is so you can certify different gardens. So when you can have third party certify your gardens. So National Wildlife Federation, you can certify a backyard or community habitat for wildlife. The Xerces Society, you can certify it for pollinator habitat. There's a few local Long Island ones as well. The National Wildlife Federation, once you create a garden, actually allows you to certify it as a community house of worship native plant gardens. So you can do that as well, where they do accept houses of worship as a certified wildlife habitat native garden. So that's something we can look into together if you'd like, and we can plan ahead for that in the future and have you certified with the National Wildlife Federation if you'd like.
That's terrific. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank you
Anthony.
so much.
Thank you, and good night,
All right.
everybody.
Yes,
Good
good night,
night.
everyone. Have a
Thank
good
you
night.
so much. Hope you all can join us next Friday and Saturday, and come get your native plant garden started.
Yes, see you all then.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night.